वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः। जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौर भक्त वृंद। हरे कृष्णा 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 हरे हरे, हरे राम 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 हरे हरे। Hare Krishna. So we will start the next chapter. That is chapter 2, the first stages of devotion. Can you see the slide? 3 types of bhakti.
No, Prabhuji, we see the Prabhupada slide.
Now?
Yes, Prabhuji.
Okay. So 3 types of bhakti. Sa bhakti sadhanam bhava prema cheti tridotita. So the 3 types of bhakti: sadhana bhakti, bhava bhakti, and prema bhakti. So this we have already seen. This is the overview of the Purva Bhag of the Bhakti Rasamrit Sindhu. That is called as the Bhagavad Bhakti Veda, varieties of devotional service, and there are 4 waves. Laharis, that is Samanya Bhakti, Sadhana Bhakti, Bhava Bhakti, and Prem Bhakti. Okay, so somebody can read from the book, the second paragraph.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. Shall I read it, Prabhuji?
Go ahead.
In this connection, Srila Rupa Goswami suggests that the person eligible for Krishna or devotional service can be classified by his particular taste. He says that devotional service is a continual process from one's previous life. No one can take to devotional service unless he has had some previous connection with it. For example, suppose in this life, I practice devotional service to some extent, even though it is not 100% perfectly performed. Whatever I have done will not be lost. In my next life, from the very point where I stop in this life, I shall begin again. In this way, there is always a continuity. But even if there is no continuity, if only by chance a person takes interest in a pure devotee's instructions, he can be accepted and can advance in devotional service. Anyway, for persons who have a natural taste for understanding books like Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam, devotional service is easier than for those who are simply accustomed to mental speculation and argumentative processes. To support this statement.
Okay. So here we are discussing eligibility for Krishna consciousness. And Srila Prabhupada is saying that devotional service is a continual process from one's previous life. So we know the verse from the Bhagavad Gita, Neha Vikram Nashasti Pratyabhayana Vitte Swalpam Pyasiddharimasya Thrayate Mahato Bayat. So whatever devotional service one has performed in this life is never lost. And as Prabhupada is mentioning over here, that and he mentions in that purport also, if one has performed 1% devotional service in this life, then it continues from 2% to the next life. So in this way, devotional service is a continuous process. So here is mentioning that this reasoning may appear to be circular. One requires attraction to begin devotional service, but one requires devotional service to achieve an attraction. Okay. So now to begin devotional service, some attraction to, as Prabhupada is writing here, or in his book Prabhupada is writing, that persons have a natural taste for understanding books like Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam. So one has to have a taste for devotional service. In order to begin devotional service, one needs to have a taste. One needs to have some attraction. But how one will develop the attraction? One will develop the attraction by some devotional service. So then what begins first? Is it the taste or is it the service? So that's the question. So the answer is that devotional service begins with the causeless mercy of a devotee. By this mercy, one may unknowingly execute devotional service, agyat sukriti, and thus develop a slight taste or attraction to bhakti. So that's how devotional service begins, with the causeless mercy of a devotee. So by the causeless mercy of a devotee, one somehow gets connected to devotional service. And then one performs some devotional activity, and then he develops agyat sukriti. Agyat means unknowingly performed sukriti. So for example, devotees go out on Harinam Sankirtan on the streets, or they conduct Jagannath Rath Yatra, or somebody just comes to the temple for darshan, he gets some prasadam. So in this way, when one comes in contact with a devotee, then one performs some devotional activity. And then when he performs some devotional activity, that's how his devotional service begins. And then when his devotional service begins, then he develops an attraction to perform some devotional activity. And then because of that attraction, he performs more service. Because of more service, more attraction, more service. And that's how the devotee progresses. But it all begins with the causeless mercy of a pure devotee. And within ISKCON, for all of us, it is ultimately the causeless mercy of Srila Prabhupada that we all came into devotional service, because by the causeless mercy of Srila Prabhupada, he has introduced all these various devotional programs like Harinam Sankirtan, book distribution, prasadam distribution. These are three main activities that Srila Prabhupada has introduced for mass preaching to the people in general. And we find that through the years, hundreds and thousands of people have come to Krishna consciousness, essentially because of these processes. And we find that how by somehow coming in contact with one of these processes, then one begins devotional service. And therefore we find that Srila Prabhupada gave great emphasis on these activities. And although sometimes we may think that apparently these activities don't produce immediate results, but actually they lay the seeds for devotional service in the hearts of so many hundreds and thousands of people. And that's how eventually people come to devotional service. So just like we have the example of Narad Muni in his previous life as a Dasi Putra. So when the Bhaktivedantas came to his house during the Chaturmasya, and his mother was serving them, and then he also performed some service. He performed some service. With their permission, he took remnants. So all this was agyat sukriti. He didn't know at that point of time what is the benefit of all these activities. But then he just performed them. And so that's how the devotees, the Bhaktivedantas, laid the seeds of agyat sukriti for Narad boy. And then that's how he got purified and later became Narad. So that's what happens to everyone. And so we find that Srila Prabhupada, because he started all these activities, therefore so many people get a chance to somehow take to some devotional practice, even without their knowing. Because if there is a Harinam Sankirtan on the street, or there is Jagannath Rath Yatra, there's so many people on the street who may have not planned to be there that day. They just happen to be there. But just because they happen to be there then somehow they hear the holy name or they have darshan of the Lord. And that's how their Agyat Sukruti begins. And then as the Agyat Sukruti matures, then they develop more and more taste for the practice of devotional service. And so therefore, we must not underestimate the potency of these activities that Srila Prabhupada has instituted within our society. And so therefore, Srila Prabhupada expected that we just carry out these activities, even though they may not be immediate results apparently. Once in Australia, Shrutagiti Prabhu, he asked Srila Prabhupada that Srila Prabhupada, we are distributing so many books over here. At that point of time in Australia, they were distributing huge numbers of books. So he asked Srila Prabhupada, we're distributing so many books, but not many people are coming to the temple. So Srila Prabhupada replied, that's none of your business. Your business is simply to carry out the instructions of the spiritual master. And then Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu will see who will come, who will not come. That's up to him. Our business is simply to carry out the instructions. And so therefore, it's very important that we carry out these instructions of Srila Prabhupada, especially these three activities of Street Harinam Sankirtan, book distribution, prasadam distribution. These activities definitely need to be carried out on a mass scale, because this is how the Agyat Sukruti of people is generated. And that is how they develop a taste for the practice of devotional service. And that's how they progress in devotional service. That's how they become eligible for Krishna consciousness. And so therefore, the root cause of developing devotional service is basically the causeless mercy of the pure devotee. Okay, somebody can read this, please.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji, Dandavat Pranam. Eligibility for Krishna consciousness. Attraction or taste is the qualification for making a commitment to the systematic cultivation of sadhana bhakti. However, there is no qualification required for receiving causeless mercy and beginning ajnata sukriti. Spiritual advancement is eternal. The attraction to Krishna gained from previous advancement in devotional service remains in one's heart. In a future life, it impels one to seek the association of devotees and take up the practice from where one left off. Thus, we can see devotees coming to the Krishna consciousness movement who begin at different levels of advancement, waves of devotion.
Right. So because the devotional service is eternal, so based upon how much devotional service one has practiced in the previous life, then one continues from that point. So therefore, everyone is not at the same level when they come to devotional service, because spiritual advancement is eternal. Yes, but as Prabhupada writes, but even if there's no continuity, if only by chance a person takes interest in a pure devotee's instruction, he can be accidentally advanced in devotional service. So even if somebody did not have any devotional service from the previous life, but still somehow if one gets attracted to the pure devotee's instruction, takes them seriously, then one can begin devotional service in advance. So in this connection, Rupa Goswami quotes this verse from the 11th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam. Yadrichaya mat katado jata shraddhastuya puman na nirvinno nati sakto bhakti yoga siddhidaha. If somehow or other by good fortune one develops faith in hearing and chanting my glories, such a person, being neither very disgusted with nor attached to material life, should achieve perfection through the path of loving devotion to me. Okay, so the word yadrichaya means somehow or other. So even if one does not have a previous connection with devotional service, somehow or another, if one develops mat katado jata shraddha, so if one develops shraddha, faith towards hearing Krishna's glories. Here Krishna himself is speaking to Uddhav, mat katadho, my glories, my pastimes. So if one somehow gets faith and taste in hearing, then such a person, he can develop devotional service. So, but there are two qualifications which are being mentioned here, and that is na nirvinno nati sakto. So na nirvinno means not very disgusted with material life, and Nati Sakto means not too attached to material life. So what is the result if one is too disgusted or too detached? So that's being explained in the commentary. Okay, somebody read this.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji, Dandavat Pranam.
Read.
Those who become disgusted with material life take to impersonal philosophical speculation and rigorously try to stamp out any trace of personal existence. Those who are still attached to material sense gratification try to purify themselves by offering the fruits of their ordinary activities to the Supreme. A first class candidate for pure devotional service, on the other hand, is neither completely disgusted with nor attached to material life.
Right. So if somebody is too disgusted with material life, then there's a possibility that one can go for the path of Gyan and aim for liberation. So that is a possibility. One is too disgusted with material life. And if one is too attached to material life, then one can take to the path of karma kand and fruitive activities. So one can take that process if one is too attached to material life. And if one is too disgusted with material life, then one may take to the path of Gyan. So therefore, Krishna is saying that the qualification is that one must not be too disgusted nor too attached to material life. Continue, please.
He does not desire to pursue ordinary material existence any further because it cannot award real happiness. Nevertheless, a candidate for devotional service does not give up all hope for perfecting personal existence. A person who avoids the two extremes of material attachment and impersonal reaction to material attachment, and who somehow or other gets the association of pure devotees, faithfully hearing their message, is a good candidate for going back to home, back to Godhead, as described here by the Lord.
Yes, so a person who avoids the two extremes, material attachment, impersonal reaction, there's a process of karma and jnana. Then, and somehow one gets attached to the association of pure devotees, then he becomes a good candidate for taking to the path of devotional service and going back home, back to Godhead. Okay, read this.
Once, some disciples said to Srila Prabhupada, Brahmanda Brahmite Kona Bhagyavan Jiva Guru Krishna Prasade Paya Bhakti Lata Bija. Only someone who's very fortunate gets the seed of the bhakti by the mercy of the Guru and Krishna. So the disciples said to Srila Prabhupada, we are not fortunate. Actually, we are very unfortunate. So how could we get bhakti? Srila Prabhupada said, I have created your good fortune.
Yes, so Srila Prabhupada, by going to the West and beginning the preaching, that's how he created the good fortune of hundreds and thousands of people all over the world. So maybe some had some connection with the devotional service in the previous life, maybe some did not. But in any case, somehow people became attracted to Srila Prabhupada to follow his instructions, and that's how their devotional service began. So in the Chaitanya Charitamrita is also said, Kona bhagye karo samsara kshayon mukahai sadhu sange tabe Krishna rati upajay. By good fortune, one becomes eligible to cross the ocean of nations, and when one's term of material existence decreases, one may get an opportunity to associate with pure devotees. By such association, one's attraction to Krishna is awakened. Okay, so again here it's at Kona Bhagye, by good fortune. So exactly why a particular living entity gets attracted to devotional service may be inconceivable from our limited perspective, from our limited vision. So why only some living entities heard the Harinam on that particular day? Why only some living entities took part in Lord Jagannath's Rath Yatra? So we have no answer to that question. The only answer is they are fortunate. So whoever comes to devotional service is definitely fortunate. Why some came, why others did not, from our very, very limited perspective, we have no answer to that. But the Shastra again and again repeats the point that whoever does somehow come to devotional service, they are fortunate. So these are three types of Agyat Sukriti that Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur describes. Somebody read.
Hare Krishna Prabhupada.
Hare.
Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur explains this point. Is this bhagya, fortune, the result of an accident or something else? In the scriptures, devotional service and pious activity are considered fortunate. Pious activities can be divided into three categories. Pious activities that awaken one's dormant Krishna consciousness are called Bhakti Unmukhi Sukriti. Pious activities that bestow material opulence are called Bhoganmukhi Sukriti, and pious activities that enable the living entity to merge into the existence of Supreme are called Mokshonmukhi Sukriti. These last two awards of pious activity are not actually fortunate. Pious activities are fortunate when they help one become Krishna conscious. The good fortune of Bhakti is attainable only when one comes in contact with a devotee. By associating with a devotee unwillingly or willingly, one advances in devotional service, and thus one's dormant Krishna consciousness is awakened. Correct.
Okay, so these are the three types of Agyat Sukriti. Bhakti Unmukhi, Bhogonmukhi, and Mokshonmukhi. Unmukhi means what follows. So by performance of an activity, if bhakti follows, that is called Bhakti Unmukhi. If bhoga follows, more sense enjoyment follows, then that's Bhogonmukhi. If moksha or mukti follows, then that is called as Mokshonmukhi. Okay, so as far as devotional activity is concerned, devotional service begins by devotional service. There is no other cause for devotional service. The cause of devotional service is always devotional service. The cause of bhakti is always bhakti. Bhakti sanjayate bhakti. That is always the principle. So somehow if one comes in contact with a devotee and performs bhakti-onmukhi sukriti, a unknowingly performed devotional activity, then one's devotional service begins. Okay. So that's basically what is called as Bhakti-onmukhi Sukriti. And Bhogonmukhi Sukriti would be doing some pious activities like giving some charity or something like that. So then he gets more sense enjoyment. He can go to the heavenly planets and so on. And similarly, if one performs some austerity, some tapasya, then that will be favorable for mukti, moksha. So that's called as Mokshonmukhi Sukriti. So in this way, there are the three types of pious activities, Agyat Sukriti, but one is really considered fortunate when one gets Bhakti-onmukhi Sukriti. Okay, any questions so far?
Can you show that what are the three type of bhakti? The first slide, the three type of bhaktis. What are those, Prabhuji? Can you? I just missed
what?
That. The three type of bhaktis. The first slide is showed, right? What are the names of those? Sadhana, bhakti.
By now you should be knowing this. Sadhana, bhava, and prema.
Okay, brother. Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna. Any other question? Okay, fine. So the next point is definition of sadhana bhakti. So this is the definition as given. Of course, this is part of the definition. But anyway, this is the main part. Kriti sadhya bhavet sadhya bhava sa sadhana bhida. So kriti sadhya means executed by the senses. Bhavet should be. Sadhya bhava. So there is sadhya and there is sadhya. So sadhya is the goal. So the goal is bhava, by which bhava, love, is acquired. Sa, that, Sadhana Abhita, that is called as Sadhana Bhakti. Okay, so Kriti Sadhya Bhavet Sadhya Bhava. So yes, and there's one more line to the definition. Nitya Siddhasya Bhavasya Prakatyam Riddhi Sadhyata. When transcendental devotional service by which love for Krishna is attained is executed by the senses, it is called sadhana bhakti, or regulative discharge of devotional service. Such devotion eternally exists within the heart of every living entity. The awakening of this eternal devotion is the potentiality of devotional service in practice. Okay, so there are two important parts of the definition of sadhana bhakti. It is executed by the senses, kriti sadhya, and the goal is bhava bhakti, or love for Krishna. Sadhya bhava. So the goal is love for Krishna. So it's executed with the senses, and the goal is love for Krishna. And Rupa Goswami says that such devotion eternally exists, nitya siddhasya bhavasya, within the heart of every living entity. And so it only has to be awakened. As Srila Prabhupada said in many lectures, it's not something to be got from outside. It is already there inside, within the heart, riddhi. It is already there within the heart, but it simply has to be awakened. And the practice by which that eternal potential devotion within the heart is awakened, that is called as sadhana bhakti, or devotional service in practice. Okay, now let's read from the book. Okay, somebody can read. Practice means employing our senses.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji, Dandavat. Practice means employing our senses in some particular type of work. Therefore, devotional service in practice means utilizing our different sensory organs in service to Krishna. Some of the senses are meant for acquiring knowledge, and some are meant for executing the conclusions of our thinking, feeling, and willing. So practice means employing both the mind and the senses in practical devotion service. This practice is not for developing something artificial. For example, a child learns or practices to walk. This walking is not unnatural. The walking capacity is there originally in the child, and simply by a little practice, he walks very nicely. Similarly, devotional service to the Supreme Lord is a natural instinct of every living entity. Even uncivilized men like the aborigines offer their respectful obeisances to something wonderful exhibited by nature's law, and they appreciate that behind some wonderful exhibition or action, there's something supreme. So this consciousness, though lying dormant in those who are materially contaminated, is found in every living entity. And when purified, this is called Krishna consciousness.
Yes. So, devotional service and practice means utilizing our different sensory organs in service to Krishna. So there are two types of senses: knowledge acquiring senses, working senses. So engaging all of them, and the mind also, engaging both the mind and the senses in devotional service, in practical devotional service. So that is what we said is priti sadhya, employing our mind and senses in Krishna's service. So here, Srila Prabhupada is giving a nice example to show that how this devotional service is innately present within the heart of every living entity. So he's given the example of the child who learns to walk. Now the walking capacity is already there in the child. And because that capacity is already there, then he just practices. And by practicing to walk, then he learns to walk eventually. But if the capacity itself is not there, then how much ever he practices, he'll never learn to walk. So just like nowadays, of course, it may not be so prevalent, but previously there was polio. So if somebody was born with polio, then he would not have the capacity to walk. Then how much ever he practices, there's no question of learning to walk because the capacity itself is not there. So similarly, devotional service, the capacity to perform devotional service is already there in every living entity. And so therefore, whoever one may be, especially as humans, whether one is American, Indian, Australian, African, it doesn't matter. Every living entity has the natural instinct to practice devotional service. And of course, Srila Prabhupada practically demonstrated that. But every living entity innately has that capacity. So it's not something artificial to be got from outside. The capacity is already there. It simply has to be awakened or aroused. And the practice by which that dormant Krishna consciousness is aroused is called as sadhana bhakti. Okay, continue reading.
There are certain prescribed methods for employing our senses and mind in such a way that our dormant consciousness for loving Krishna will be invoked, as much as this child with a little practice can begin to walk. One who has no basic walking capacity cannot walk by practice. Similarly, Krishna consciousness cannot be aroused simply by practice. Actually, there is no such practice. When we wish to develop our innate capacity for devotional service, there are certain processes which, by our accepting and executing them, will cause that dormant capacity to be invoked. Such practice is called sadhana bhakti.
Continue.
Every living entity under the spell of material energy is held to be in an abnormal condition of madness. In Srimad Bhagavatam, it is said, generally the conditioned soul is mad because he is always engaged in activities which are the causes of bondage and suffering. Spirit soul in his original condition is joyful, blissful, eternal, and full of knowledge. Only by his implication in material activities has he become miserable, temporary, and full of ignorance. This is due to vikarma. Vikarma means actions which should not be done. Therefore, we must practice sadhana bhakti, which means to offer mangalarti, deity worship in the morning, to refrain from certain material activities, to offer obeisances to the spiritual master, and to follow many other rules and regulations which will be discussed here one after another. These practices will help one become cured of madness. As a man's mental disease is cured by the directions of a psychiatrist, so this sadhana bhakti cures the conditioned soul of his madness under the spell of Maya, material illusion.
Okay, so Srila Prabhupada is explaining here that every living entity under the spell of material energy is held to be in an abnormal condition of madness. And Srila Prabhupada is quoting from the Srimad Bhagavatam. And Prabhupada is given the translation to the verse. This is in Rishabdev's teachings. Nunam pramatta kurute vikarma yad indriya pritiya aprinoti. So, nunam pramatta kurute vikarma. So, pramatta, matta means mad, and pramatta means sufficiently mad. So, every living entity is said to be sufficiently mad. Why? Because if anyone has ever visited a mental asylum, anyone has visited mental asylum?
Yes.
Okay, so then what did you see there?
Patients of different kinds, schizophrenia, dementia, and all.
Okay, so what are they doing, or what are they saying?
They repeat the same words.
They repeat
And they
what?
the same words. They repeat the same things again and again.
Mm-hmm.
And they look into some, and they talk to themselves, and they talk about illusionary things.
Mm.
They look
Right.
confused, Prabhu.
Definitely, yes. And so we will find that in the mental asylum, one person will say, I'm Prime Minister, other person will say, I'm President, somebody will say, I'm Police Inspector, and they're convinced about it. And they'll be even giving orders and doing so many things. And they're very serious about what they say, about what they identify themselves with. They're very serious about it. They have no doubts about it. So they misidentify themselves with a particular post or position, even though they don't have it. That is the madness. That is the madness. So similarly, every living entity in the material world under the influence of the material energy is also considering himself or misidentifying himself to be what?
Body.
Yes. So anyone in this material world who misidentifies himself to be the body is in a state of madness, because he's not the body, but he's thinking himself to be the body. So it is just like the madman who misidentifies himself to be president, prime minister, or something. So in the same way, somebody who misidentifies himself to be the body, which he is not, is in a state of madness. So that is why Lord Rishabhdev is saying, Nunam Pramatta. So one who is mad, misidentifying himself with the body. So anyway, it just reminds me of this lecture of Srila Prabhupada. So Srila Prabhupada was giving his own practical experience in Calcutta when a certain person, he committed a murder. So he was brought before the judge. And so when he was brought before the judge, so he pleaded with the judge that when he committed the murder, he was not in a proper frame of mind. He was insane. And so therefore he pleaded to be excused. So the judge called in for the doctor, that was a civil surgeon, and the doctor examined this person. And after he examined, he came to the conclusion that what he says is true, that he was not in a proper frame of mind. He was somewhat insane when he committed the murder. But the doctor added that, in my opinion, in this world, everyone is somewhat mad. So Srila Prabhupada says that not only we are saying, but even a qualified doctor agrees on this point, that actually everyone in this world is somewhat mad. And so this is the madness of every living entity, and that is they misidentify with the body. And so Srila Prabhupada is writing, so just like a mad person, he needs to take the treatment given by a psychiatrist. So when he follows the directions of the psychiatrist, he gets cured of his madness. So similarly, the living entities who are in this state of madness, misidentifying themselves with the body, also need to take the treatment from a doctor. And who's the doctor? The spiritual master. And the spiritual master gives various instructions. So when one follows the instructions of the spiritual master, Srila Prabhupada is saying here, rising early in the morning, offering Mangalarti and deity worship, and also refraining from certain activities. So following the various rules and regulations. So these are the instructions given by the doctor, that is the spiritual master. And by following those rules and regulations of sadhana bhakti, then one gets gradually cured from this madness. Okay, so that's how we need to follow the instructions of the spiritual master diligently. Just like one needs to diligently follow the instructions of the psychiatrist, the doctor, in order to get cured from the madness. So similarly, one needs to very diligently follow the instructions of the spiritual master in order to get cured of the madness of misidentifying with the body and performing vikarma, sinful activity. So that's what the verse is saying. Nunam pramatta kurute vikarma. So when one is in the state of madness, misidentifying with the body, then the result of that is yad indriya preet. So he performs vikarma, that is sinful activities, for what? For the purpose of satisfying the senses. So this is the madness of the conditioned living entities. And in order to come out of the madness, they need to follow the directions given by the spiritual master And that's essentially what constitutes the process of sadhana bhakti. Okay, so now these are some verses from the Chaitanya Charitamrita where it is explained Shravanadi Kriya Tara Swarupa Lakshana Tatastha Lakshane Upajaya Premadhana. The spiritual activities of hearing, chanting, remembering, and so forth are the natural characteristics of devotional service. The marginal characteristic is that it awakens your love for Krishna. So the Swarup Lakshan, or the primary characteristic of Sadhana Bhakti, is Shravan Adi Kriya, hearing, chanting, remembering, etc. So these are the primary activities of Sadhana Bhakti. And it results in the Tatastha Lakshan, that is Premadhan, pure love for Krishna. And so therefore, when we talk of Sadhana Bhakti, the most important instructions for Sadhana Bhakti are hearing, chanting, and remembering. So these are primary activities of Sadhana Bhakti. So therefore, one has to lay great emphasis on these primary activities of hearing and chanting. So if there's no hearing and chanting, then progress on the path of Sadhana Bhakti is very difficult, because that's how the Sadhana Bhakti actually begins. So in the ninefold process of devotional service, it begins with Shravanam, it begins with hearing. Because without hearing, there cannot be Kirtan, without hearing, there cannot be Smaranam, remembrance. None of the other processes can be performed without the primary process of Shravanam, hearing. So therefore, in the next verse it is said, Nitya Siddha Krishna Prem Sadhya Kabunoi Shravanadi Shuddha Chit Karoyo Udoy. Pure love for Krishna is eternally established in the hearts of the living entities. It is not something to be gained from another source. When the heart is purified by hearing and chanting, this love naturally awakens. So as we already did mention this, Nitya Siddha Krishna Prem. Krishna Prem is eternally present within the hearts of the living entities. It only needs to be awakened or aroused by the process of Shravan Adi, Shuddha Chitte. So by the process of hearing, chanting, remembering, etc., the heart gets purified, Shuddha Chitte. And then this Krishna Prem gets aroused, Karoy Uda. And so therefore, great emphasis is laid on the practices of Shravanam Kirtanam, hearing, chanting, on the path of Sadhana Bhakti. And Srila Prabhupada also, he gave great emphasis to these processes of hearing and chanting. These are the primary processes of Sadhana Bhakti. And therefore, it is very important for us to lay great emphasis on hearing and chanting. So therefore, Srila Prabhupada, he wanted us to hear daily, Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya, daily hearing of Srimad Bhagavatam and Bhagavad Gita. So therefore, Srila Prabhupada started daily Bhagavatam class in the morning, Bhagavad Gita class in the evening. He wanted these every day. And of course, there are so many Prabhupada's instructions on reading 1 or 2 hours of his books every day, besides the Bhagavatam and Bhagavad Gita class. So these are all Prabhupada's instructions. And Srila Prabhupada, as the verse says in the Bhagavad Gita, Kirtaniya Sadahari, Satatam Kirtayanto Mam. So Krishna also says, Satatam, always, 24 hours a day, in so many verses. And so therefore, the process of hearing and chanting are something which is very important for our sadhana bhakti. One cannot neglect these processes, because without hearing and chanting, the purification cannot take place. And without purification, Krishna Prem cannot be aroused. The primary process for purification are Shravanam and Kirtan. So one can never neglect these. So one cannot say, I will just do some practical services, I will not do hearing and chanting. No, it doesn't work that way. So if one does not perform hearing and chanting, then the practical services cannot last. Because, as Srila Prabhupada explains in his lectures, and there is a famous lecture which Srila Prabhupada gave in Mayapur on Queen Kunti's prayers. I don't remember the exact verse number on which he was giving this lecture. But in any case, so Srila Prabhupada in that lecture, he says that actually, as Srila Prabhupada began that Bhagavatam class, there was one devotee who stood up to leave the class. So Srila Prabhupada asked, where is he going? So somebody replies that he has some work to do. And Srila Prabhupada was so upset. And Srila Prabhupada said, what work? Without hearing what work can he perform? It will simply be Ugra Karma. So why? Because without hearing and chanting, without purification, the practical service not done in the proper consciousness will simply be materialistic activity. That is the meaning of Ugra Karma. Ugra Karma means materialistic activity. So what differentiates a material activity from a spiritual activity? The activity per se may be the same. Materialistic people are also cooking and eating. They also may be making garlands. They also sell books. Apparently, the activities done by devotees and non-devotees are the same. What makes the difference? Can somebody say in one word, what makes the difference?
Hare Krishna.
Consciousness.
They are doing
Yeah.
for
Yes, the
Krishna.
consciousness.
Yeah,
That's right.
consciousness.
What makes the
Yeah.
difference is the consciousness. And so therefore, in order to perform the activity in the right consciousness, the purification is required. And that purification essentially takes place by Shravanam and Kirtan. And Srila Prabhupada goes on to say in that lecture that if one is not regularly performing these activities of hearing and chanting, then the Archa Vigraha will become Galagraha. Archa Vigraha means the deity will become Galagraha. Galagraha means a huge burden, a huge stone tied around the neck. And Prabhupada goes on to say, then you will, after some years, you will say, why is my old spiritual master given me this huge burden? So the practical devotional service will turn out to be a huge burden given by the spiritual master. Then how long one will continue with the burden? Just a matter of time, one will stop. So the practical services without hearing and chanting will eventually become burdensome, because without purification, one cannot have the proper consciousness to perform the practical services. And so therefore, Srila Prabhupada has given us the appropriate balance. So on one hand, we need the sadhana practices of hearing and chanting for a purification. And then we also have the practical services, because we don't have a taste for doing hearing and chanting throughout the day. So we have a practical services to keep the mission going ahead. And then when we perform the practical services to please Srila Prabhupada and the spiritual masters, then by their mercy, we get a taste for hearing and chanting. So that's how both of them are related. But one has to give a great emphasis on hearing and chanting in our sadhana practices as the primary processes for purification. Okay, a lecture by Srila Prabhupada, please read.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji. Pushing process. So the fact is that we have got devotion for Krishna. That is fact. But some way or other we are separated and we have forgotten. So as soon as by this regulative principle, by the order of the spiritual master, by the injunction of the Shastras, we begin devotional service. That just like our students do here.
Thank you.
This devotional service is the pushing process, and as soon as the energy comes, then automatically cluck, cluck, cluck. No more pushing. Automatically. This pushing process is required.
Yes. So Srila Prabhupada is calling this process of sadhana bhakti to a pushing process. Why pushing process? Because in the conditioned state, we don't have a natural taste for the practice of devotional service. And so therefore, the spiritual master gives instructions, and sort of pushes us to follow them. So Prabhupada has given the example of a machine. So just like, especially in India, we may have seen, especially in the rainy season or winters also, sometimes a car or bus stops right in the middle of the road. It doesn't start. And then what do the people do? They all get down from the bus or the car and they push. And then when they push for some time, and then the car starts. And then once it starts moving automatically. So similarly, so initially there's no taste. So because there's no taste, then there is a push by the spiritual master, by the injunctions of the Shastras. And then if one somehow agrees to follow, then gradually the taste develops, and then automatically one continues the process. But initially, some push may be required by the spiritual authorities. And so therefore, then we do find that sometimes Srila Prabhupada also would push the disciples to follow instructions, to get up early in the morning, attend Mangalarti. There is the famous instant in 1977, Srila Prabhupada was at Prayagraj, Allahabad for the Kumbh Mela in January of 1977. So I don't know if some of you may have experience of January winter in North India. So extremely cold. So devotees were not getting up for Mangalarti. So then Srila Prabhupada, he noticed that, and then Srila Prabhupada himself, then he, even though this 1977, his health was not at all good, but still Srila Prabhupada, he got up and he would take a shower under the hand pump. So just to set the example that how it is important to follow the instructions. So that's how sometimes the spiritual authorities have to push the students to follow the various instructions. So that is sadhana bhakti, because initially one doesn't have the natural taste. So Rupa Goswami describes the essence of sadhana bhakti by quoting this verse from the Srimad Bhagavatam. This is 7th canto, 1st chapter, 31st verse. This is Narad Muni speaking to King Yudhishthir. Gopya kamad bhayat kamso dveshat chaityadeyo nripa sambandhat vrishnaya snehat yuyam bhaktya vayam vibho. My dear King Yudhishthir, the gopis by their lusty desires, Kamsa by his fear, Shishupal and other kings by envy, the Yadus by their familial relationship with Krishna, you Pandavas by your great affection for Krishna, and we the general devotees by our devotional service have obtained the mercy of Krishna. Okay, so here is describing how different devotees, they get the mercy of Krishna. Of course, here examples of Kamsa and Shishupal have been given, but their devotional service was unfavorable, even though they were always thinking of Krishna, but it was not anukulyena. So therefore, that's not pure devotional service, but in any case, they were thinking of Krishna. So in continuation, in the next verse, Narad Muni says, Tatamopi navena syad panchanam purusham prati tasmad kenapi upayena mana krishne niveshayet. Somehow or other, one must consider the form of Krishna very seriously. Then by one of the 5 different processes mentioned above, one can return home back to Godhead. Atheists like King Vena, however, being unable to think of Krishna's form in any of these 5 ways, cannot obtain salvation. Therefore, one must somehow think of Krishna, whether in a friendly way or inimically. So the essence of sadhana bhakti is tasmat kenapi upayena mana Krishna niveshayet. Somehow or other, one must think of Krishna. Now here, it's said in a friendly way or inimically. But then we have already established in the definition of pure devotional service that pure devotional service has to be performed in what way? Friendly or inimical?
Friendly.
Friendly way.
Yes, so that's already established by the word anukulyena. So therefore, I forgot to mention at that time, that definition of pure devotional service, Anya Bilashita Shunyam, that verse is called as the Paribasha Sutra. So the Paribasha Sutra of any book forms the basis of the book. The Paribasha Sutra is either a verse or a phrase which indicates the foundational basis of the book, on which the entire book is based on. And so therefore, every other aspect within the book has to be seen in light of the Paribasha Sutra. So just like somebody knows what is the Paribasha Sutra for the Srimad Bhagavatam?
Janmadhyasya.
No,
Janmadhyasya yatta.
No.
no, that
The fruit, what is that?
The spotless Purana, will it not signify, Prabhu?
So anyway, it is the first canto, 3rd chapter, verse number 28. Ete cham shakala pumsa Krishnastu Bhagavan Svayam Indrari Vyakulam Lokam Hridayanti Yuge Yuge. So this is the Paribasha Sutra of the Srimad Bhagavatam, establishing Krishna as the Supreme Personality of God, the source of all avatars. So every other aspect of the Srimad Bhagavatam has to be seen in light of this verse, that Krishnastu Bhagavan Svayam. So this is called as the Paribasha Sutra. So similarly, the Paribasha Sutra for the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu is the definition of pure devotional service, Anya Bilashita Shunya. So therefore, everything else has to be seen in that context. So therefore, even though here it is said, whether in a friendly way or inimically, but still, already it has been established that pure devotional service means it has to be anukulyena, in a friendly way. But anyways, here the point is, tasmat kenapi upayena mana Krishna niveshayet. This is the essence of sadhana bhakti. Somehow or other, engage the mind in thinking of Krishna. That's the point with Jiva Goswami's commentary on this verse. So he says, fixing the mind also stands for the activities of all the other senses, thus includes Vedic sadhana. Yes, so one's mind should come. Yes.
Can I ask one question, or you want end at end?
Just 1 second. I'll just finish this. One's mind should concentrate by using one of the favorable methods, such as affection. So that's the point. So that we already discussed. So it has to be favorable. It cannot be unfavorable or inimical. So then how can one keep the mind absorbed in Krishna? So Prabhupada is speaking this, read.
Okay. Hare Krishna. How can one keep the mind absorbed in Krishna? 2 examples. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has given us an authorized program for this purpose, centered around the chanting of Hare Krishna mantra. This chanting has so much power that it immediately attaches one to Krishna. This is the beginning of sadhana bhakti. Somehow or other, one has to fix his mind on Krishna. The great saint Ambarish Maharaja, although a responsible king, fixed his mind on Krishna, and similarly, anyone who tries to fix his mind in this way will very rapidly make progress in successfully reviving his original Krishna consciousness.
Okay, so the easiest way to keep the mind absorbed in Krishna is by chanting the holy names. And yes, Ambarish Maharaj also engaged his mind in Krishna service. So that's how somehow we have to engage our mind in remembering Krishna. Okay, so what was the question?
Hare Krishna Prabhu. In the previous sloka, it is mentioned as gopis has lust. So because they never had.
So that's not material lust. It is called as lust because it appears like lust, and that is something which we can understand. So that is why the acharyas call it as kama, because it appears like lust. But of course, we understand from the scriptures that it is not kama, it is prema. But it is only for our understanding that it is described like that.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Fine. So this is the essence, to somehow engage the mind and remembrance of Krishna. And the easiest way to do that is by chanting the holy names. So now, two types of sadhana bhakti. One is Vaidhi sadhana bhakti. And Prabhupada writes, the first part is called service according to regulative principles. One has to follow these different regulative principles by the order of the spiritual master on the strength of authoritative scriptures. And the other is Raganuga sadhana bhakti. So anyway, we'll discuss Raganuga sadhana bhakti later on. So now our focus is on Vaidhi sadhana bhakti. So though the ultimate goal is definitely Raganuga, and as it is said, Raga Marga Bhakti Loke Karite Pracharam. So Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu appeared to propagate devotional service in the world on the platform of spontaneous attraction. That is the goal. The goal is to come to the Raga platform. But in order to come to that platform, then Vaidhi sadhana is what is required. So this is the definition of Vaidhi sadhana bhakti. When there is no attachment or no spontaneous loving service to the Lord, and one is engaged in the service of the Lord simply out of obedience to the order of the spiritual master or in pursuance of the scriptures, such obligatory service is called Vaidhi bhakti. Okay, so there are three aspects of this definition. The first is there is no attachment or spontaneous loving service. So there's no spontaneous attachment to the Lord, but one practices devotional service simply out of obedience to the order of the spiritual master or in pursuance of the scriptures. So such obligatory service is called as Vaidhi bhakti, Vaidhi sadhana bhakti. So basically there is no spontaneous attraction, but one practices the devotional service because Guru has instructed, Shastras have instructed, therefore one practices. So in the Chaitanya Charitamrita it said, Maya Mukta Jivere Nahi Swata Krishna Gyan, Jivere Kripai Kaila Krishna Veda Puran. The conditioned soul cannot revive his Krishna consciousness by his own effort, but out of causeless mercy, Lord Krishna compiled the Vedic literature and its supplements, the Puranas. Okay, so for the purpose of delivering the fallen conditioned souls, Krishna has given all the scriptures. Okay, so now, since Vaidhi sadhana bhakti means following the instructions of the spiritual master, therefore we have taken some references from the Chaitanya Charitamrita. This is the famous verse from the Chaitanya Charitamrita. Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's teachings to Rupa Goswami. Brahmanda Brahmite Kona Bhagyavana Jeev, Guru Krishna Prasadi Pai, Bhakti Lata Bij. So after wandering through innumerable universes and different species of life, out of causeless mercy. So here again the word, Kona Bhagyavana Jeev, some fortunate soul, gets the Bhakti Lata Bij, the seed of devotional service by the mercy of Guru and Krishna. So here in the purport to that verse, Srila Prabhupada is describing in detail what is the meaning of Bhakti Lata Bij and what is the meaning of Guru Kripa. Okay, somebody can read.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji. Practice of Vaidhi Sadhana Bhakti. The word Guru Prasada indicates that the spiritual master is very merciful in bestowing the boon of devotional service upon the disciple. That is the best possible gift the spiritual master has to offer. Those with a background of pious life are eligible to receive life's supreme benefit, and to bestow this benefit, the Supreme Personality of Godhead sends his representative to impart his mercy. Endowed with the mercy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the spiritual master distributes the mercy to those who are elevated and pious. Thus, the spiritual master trains the disciples to render devotional service unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead. This is called Guru Kripa. It is Krishna Prasada, Krishna's mercy, that he sends a bona fide spiritual master to the deserving disciple. By the mercy of Krishna, one meets the bona fide spiritual master, and by the mercy of the spiritual master, the disciple is fully trained in the devotional service of the Lord.
Okay, so here, Srila Prabhupada is giving a very precise definition of what is meant by Guru Kripa. The spiritual master trains his disciples to render devotional service under the Supreme Personality of God. This is called as Guru Kripa. Okay, so the real mercy is the instructions and the training which the spiritual master gives to the disciples. Okay, so because without that training, without the instructions, how will the devotee progress? So the progress of the disciple is based on following the instructions, following the teachings of the Guru. So therefore, the real kripa, the real mercy of the Guru is training the disciples to render devotional service, giving instructions. That is the real kripa. So therefore, when we talk of Guru Kripa, it is not something sentimental, but it is actually the instructions one receives, and then one actually receives the mercy by following the instructions. Continue, please.
Hare Krishna. Yeah, Bhakti Lata Bij means the seed of devotional service. Everything has the original cause or the seed. For any idea, program, plan, or device, there is a first of all the contemplation of the plan, and that is called the bija or seed. The methods, rules, and regulations by which one is perfectly trained in devotional service constitute the Bhakti Lata Bij, or seed of devotional service. The Bhakti Lata Bij is received from the spiritual master by the grace of Krishna. Other seeds called Anyabhilasha Bija includes Karma Bija and Jnana Bija. If one is not fortunate enough to receive the Bhakti Lata Bij from the spiritual master, he instead cultivates such seeds as a Karma Bija, Jnana Bija, or the political, social, or philanthropic Bijas. However, the Bhakti Lata Bija is different from these other Bijas. The Bhakti Lata Bij can be received only through the mercy of the spiritual master. Therefore, one has to satisfy the spiritual master to get the Bhakti Lata Bij. Yasya prasade Bhagvat prasada.
Okay, so this is the definition of, so this is the definition of Bhakti Lata Bij. Actually, Prabhupada is giving the methods, rules, and regulations by which one is perfectly trained in devotional service constitute the Bhakti Lata Bij, or the seed of devotional service. Okay, so this is the meaning of receiving Bhakti Lata Bij from the spiritual master. So basically, the spiritual master gives instructions, methods, rules, and regulations. They're basically the instructions which the spiritual master gives to the disciple. And yes, this Bhakti Lata Bij is received from the spiritual master by the grace of Krishna. So ultimately, everything happens by the grace of Krishna. The spiritual master is the representative of Krishna. And so on behalf of Krishna, the spiritual master gives the Bhakti Lata Bij to the disciple. And that basically means the instructions which he gives to the disciple. So of course, if one does not cultivate bhakti, then obviously one is bound to cultivate materialistic activities. So that's what karma bij, jnana bij, and everything else means. Continue, please.
Hare Krishna. The Bhakti Lata Bija is the origin of devotional service. Unless one satisfies the spiritual master, he gets the bija or the root cause of the karma, jnana, and yoga without the benefit of devotional service. But one who is faithful to his spiritual master gets the Bhakti Lata Bija. This Bhakti Lata Bija is received when one is initiated by the bona fide spiritual master. After receiving the spiritual master's mercy, one must repeat his instruction, and this is called Shravana Kirtana, hearing and chanting. One who has not properly heard from the spiritual master, or who does not follow the regulative principles, is not fit for chanting Kirtana. This is explained in the Bhagavad Gita 2.41. Vyavasayatmika buddhir ekoha kuru nandana. One who has not listened carefully to the instruction of spiritual master is unfit for the chanting or for preaching the cult of devotional service. One has to water the Bhakti Lata Bija by receiving instruction from the spiritual master.
Yes, so when unless one satisfies the spiritual master, he gets the bija of karma gyan. So basically, by satisfying the spiritual master, one gets the Bhakti Lata Bij, one gets the instructions, and then one has to just like one, in order for the plant to grow, one has to water the plant. So similarly, in order for the Bhakti Lata Bij to grow into the Bhakti Lata, that is the creeper of devotional service, one has to water it by the process of Shravanam Kirtanam. So first one has to hear, then one has to repeat. Therefore, Prabhupada says one who has not listened carefully to the instructions spiritual master is unfit for chanting or preaching. So if one does not hear, how can one preach? So first of all, one has to hear carefully, and then one has to repeat. So without hearing, what will one repeat? So if one does not hear properly, then one will speculate. So therefore, what is very important is, first of all, one has to hear. And I'm sure most of us know that Srila Prabhupada himself was appreciated by spiritual master Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur for attentively hearing. And Srila Prabhupada, in his own words, in his lectures, he says that, so those days, even though I did not understand much of the philosophy which my spiritual master was speaking, but still I continued to hear. And my spiritual master noted that at the time of initiation. So when I was to be initiated in 1933, and the temple president was introducing him, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur said that, yes, I've noted it. This boy likes to hear. So we find that because Srila Prabhupada liked to hear, then his preaching became very effective. And as Srila Prabhupada would very often say, that my only qualification is that I simply repeated the instructions of my spiritual master. So that is how one receives the Bhakti Lata Bij from the spiritual master, and then one waters it by essentially the process of hearing and chanting. That's how the Bhakti Lata grows. So therefore, it is said, Tate Krishna bhaje kare guru rasevana, maya jala chute paya krishnera charana. If the conditioned soul engages in the service of the Lord and simultaneously carries out the orders of a spiritual master and serves him, he can get out of the clutches of Maya and become eligible for shelter at Krishna's lotus feet. So therefore, following the instructions of the spiritual master is something very important in order to come out of the clutches of Maya. So now, Rupa Goswami is giving this verse as an example of sadhana bhakti. Because apparently King Parikshit, he left everything, he left his kingdom and everything, and came to the bank of the Ganges to hear, because of the curse of Shringi to die within 7 days. And so therefore, apparently it appears that Parikshit Maharaj, out of fear of dying, engaged himself in the process of hearing. So it appears that Parikshit Maharaj was performing sadhana bhakti, Vaidhi sadhana bhakti. That means he doesn't have a spontaneous taste, but out of fear of dying, he heard the Srimad Bhagavatam from Shukadeva Goswami. So therefore, Rupa Goswami gives this as an example of Vaidhi sadhana bhakti. Tasmad Bharata Sarvatma Bhagavan Ishwaro Hari Shrotavya Kirtavyascha Smartavyas Chetadabhayam. O descendant of King Bharata, one who desires to be free from all miseries must hear about, glorify, and also remember the personality of Godhead, who is the super soul, the controller, and the savior from all miseries. Okay, so somebody can read from the book. In my book, it's page number 22. These principles of Vaidhi Bhakti are also described.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji. Yeah, these principles of Vaidhi Bhakti are also described in the Srimad Bhagavatam.
Can you be a little louder, please?
Hare Krishna Prabhuji.
Mm-hmm.
Prabhuji, your voice is like not very audible, so maybe you should come near to the microphone.
Sure, Prabhuji.
It's very feeble, Prabhuji, not able to hear properly.
Okay. Somebody can continue because I will switch over to my headset.
You're not able to hear properly.
Oh, somebody else can read.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji, can I read? Yeah, Mataji, please read.
No, it's okay. It's your read. I have read once.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Mataji. These principles of Vaidhi Bhakti are also described in Srimad Bhagavatam, 2nd canto, 1st chapter, verse 5, where Sukadev Goswami instructs the dying Maharaj Parikshit as to his course of action. Maharaja Parikshit met Sukadev Goswami just a week before his death, and the king was perplexed as to what should be done before he was to pass on. Many other sages also arrived there, but no one could give him the proper direction. Sukadev Goswami, however, gave this direction to him as follows. My dear king, if you want to be fearless in meeting your death next week, for actually everyone is afraid at the point of death, then you must immediately begin the process of hearing and chanting and remembering God. If one can chant and hear Hare Krishna and always remember Lord Krishna, then he is sure to become fearless of death, which may come at any moment. Prabhuji, shall I continue? All right. In the statements of Sukadev Goswami, it is said that the Supreme Personality of Godhead is Krishna. Therefore, Sukadev recommends that one should always hear about Krishna. He does not recommend that one hear and chant about the demigods. The Mayavadis, impersonalists, say that one may chant any name, either that of Krishna or those of the demigods, and the result will be the same. But actually, this is not a fact. According to the authorized version of Srimad Bhagavatam, one has to hear and chant about Lord Vishnu, Krishna only. Shall I continue? Okay. So Sukadev Goswami has recommended to Parikshit Maharaj that in order to be fearless of death, one has to hear and chant and remember the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna. By all means, he also mentions that the Supreme Personality of Godhead is Sarvatma. Sarvatma means the super soul of everyone. Krishna is also mentioned as Ishvara, the Supreme Controller who is situated in everyone's heart. Therefore, if some way or other we become attached to Krishna, he will make us free from all danger. In Bhagavad Gita, it is said that anyone who becomes a devotee of the Lord is never vanquished. Others, however, are always vanquished. Vanquished means that after getting the human form of life, a person does not come out of the entanglement of birth and death, and thus misses his golden opportunity. Such a person does not know where he is being thrown by the laws of nature.
One more paragraph.
Sure. Suppose one does not develop Krishna consciousness in this human form of life, he will be thrown into the cycle of birth and death, involving 84 lakhs species of life, and his spiritual identity will remain lost. One does not know whether he is going to be a plant or a beast or a bird or something like that, because there are so many species of life. The recommendation of Rupa Goswami for reviving our original Krishna consciousness is that somehow or other we should apply our minds to Krishna very seriously, and thus also become fearless of death. After death, we do not know our destination because we are completely under the control of the laws of nature. Only Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is controller over the laws of nature. Therefore, if we take shelter of Krishna seriously, there will be no fear of being thrown back into the cycle of so many species of life. A sincere devotee will surely be transferred to the abode of Krishna as affirmed in Bhagavad Gita.
Okay,
Hare
fine.
Krishna.
So yes, so that's how Parishit Maharaj, out of fear of death, he heard the Srimad Bhagavatam from Shukadeva Goswami. Srila Prabhupada is describing that's how one can be saved from going into the lower species. Okay, fine. So, are there any questions so far?
I have a question, Prabhu.
Go ahead.
Okay. Well, Prabhu is reading it, like it is mentioned that if you are not completely successful in Krishna conscious, will be thrown out. But like one of the sloka in Bhagavad Gita, even if you do little devotional service, so it is being assured that that will be saved and you will be progressing next step. So,
Right.
what it is being read is like slightly
So where are you
raw.
reading from?
No, I mean Bhagavad Gita in 4th chapter it is
No,
mentioned.
that is fine. But what you said that unless one is successful, where is that?
Yeah, while Prabhuji is reading it, it is mentioned
Where?
that like I have not got the exact book, Prabhu. To follow it, I have followed the reading.
You don't have the book?
I have the book, Prabhu, but I
Prabhuji,
was
it's
just
page number
focusing on reading.
26, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like others, however, are always vanquished. Vanquished means that that after getting the human form of life, a person does not come out of the entanglement of birth and death. I think that is the para Prabhuji was mentioning.
Yes, Prabhuji, correct. So
Yes.
yeah.
So yes, if he does not take to devotional service, then he misses the opportunities.
Okay. But somewhere I mentioned, I will refer it again, Prabhuji. It is mentioned that if you are not fully Krishna conscious, that's where it is mentioned. I will refer it, Prabhu. No problem. Thank you. I will reread it.
See, at the end of the next paragraph, Prabhupada is very clearly saying, therefore, if we take shelter of Krishna seriously, there will be no fear of being thrown back into the cycle of so many species of life. Right. Okay, any other questions? Okay, good. If there are no more questions, we'll stop for today because we'll start a new topic. So we'll start that next.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji, can I ask a simple, small question?
Okay.
Yeah. So does reading or studying scriptures like Bhagavad Gita or Srimad Bhagavatam is part of Shravanam in Navida Bhakti, or is it a
Yes.
complementary or supportive activity
Yes.
performing in Navida Bhakti?
Reading is as good as hearing. Because when we're reading, what are we doing? We're hearing also, no, simultaneously.
Okay. Yeah. Because
as we're
Prabhuji, right,
reading, we are also hearing.
Yeah. Because if one is not able to read or study, right, will it a blocker in devotional service or
No.
hearing is okay?
Yes, hearing is as hearing, reading, all of them are Shravanam and are equally potent.
Yeah. Okay, Prabhuji. Thanks for the clarification.
Right.
Done with now.
In fact, Srila Prabhupada says in a purport in the first canto that hearing and explaining is more potent than just reading. So, in fact, hearing is given more emphasis. But as we are reading, we're also hearing.
Yeah. Okay, Prabhuji. Thank you.
Anything else? Some other questions?
I have one more question, Prabhuji. Because we are hearing so much, okay, but like, how do you remember it, Prabhu? It is a generic question. How do you remember it and how do you structure it?
Yes. So as we read, hear, and we repeat then we will remember. So therefore, we need to repeat what we are reading and hearing, so we can discuss with other devotees, as Krishna said in the Bhagavad Gita, Macchitta Madgata Prana Bodhayanta Parasparam. So that is what we are supposed to do. We are supposed to discuss whatever we hear and read. We can discuss with other devotees, and that's how we'll be able to remember.
Okay. Okay, Prabhuji, got it.
Okay, fine. So we will stop for today, and we'll continue in our next class on Monday.
Yes.
Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Shri Bhakti
Jai.
Rasamrita Sindhu ki jai, Shri Rupa Goswami ki jai, Samved Gaur Bhaktivinoda ki jai. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, 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 Ram.
Hare Hare.
Thank you.
Thank you, Prabhuji.
Thank you.